People have been telling ghost stories for millennia, both for entertainment and to explain those odd experiences we don't yet fully understand. For this first set of haunted tales, here are 4 old ghost stories to start off your spooky season. In the 1st century AD, Roman magistrate Pliny the Younger wrote to a friend on the topic of ghosts and related 3 stories. One story was that of Athenodorus, a Stoic philosopher who is said to have stayed in a haunted house in Athens before Pliny's time. It was said that at this mansion the sounds of clanking iron and chains were heard in the middle of the night. They would get closer and closer, and soon occupants would see the apparition of an emaciated old man, shackled and rattling his chains. This would disturb them so much that they couldn't sleep, and would eventually get ill and die. The house was deserted when Athenodorus came along, who was glad to rent it at a low price even after learning the full story. The first night, he had a couch made up in the front part of the house, and wrote by the light of a lamp. Alone but for his servants in the inner rooms. He concentrated hard on his writing, but soon came the sounds of clanking iron and dragging chains. Athenodorus continued on, trying his best to ignore the sounds. They grew louder and louder until he could tell they were in the room with him. Finally, he looked around, and the ghost was there, beckoning him. Athenodorus signaled for the spirit to wait till he came to a better stopping place in his writing. The apparition rattled its chains above his head as he finished. When he looked back, it was again beckoning, so he took his lamp and followed it slowly to a courtyard, where it disappeared. Athenodorus marked the spot, and the next day had it dug up. There he found human remains buried with chains. The remains were then given a public burial, after which the ghost was never seen again. Whether a true alleged encounter, or just a sort of parable, this haunted house tale may have influenced many ghost stories to come. Our next story took place in my home state of Virginia, and was said to have spanned a number of years. Tellings varied a bit, but here's the tale as told by Virginia ghost lore author L.B. Taylor Jr. in his 1993 book, The Ghosts of Virginia. The historic Shirley Plantation sits overlooking the James River between Richmond and Williamsburg. The site dates back to 1613, and the present 3-story brick house to the 1700s. The Shirley house has a collection of family portraits, and the most famous is that of Martha Hill, known as Aunt Pratt. Hill was a reputedly mysterious woman who lived during the 18th century. She actually spent little time at the house, and moved to England as a young woman, where she eventually died. The painting of Aunt Pratt was relegated to the attic of the house by the mid-1800s, after having had a more prominent place for years. On certain late nights, the family and guests would hear the sound of rocking coming from the attic. When they went to investigate, activity ceased. But Aunt Pratt's portrait stared at them, as if she had something on her mind. When she was moved back downstairs, the sounds were never heard again. It is said that much later, in the 1970s, when displayed in an exhibit with other paranormal artifacts, Aunt Pratt decided to express her disapproval once again. Accounts allegedly claimed that her portrait once swung around in its case, and that one morning a worker found the painting on the floor several feet away, as if it were trying to escape. Aunt Pratt was then locked in a closet, and one night a maintenance crew heard sounds of knocking and crying from inside, but there was no one there. In the morning, Aunt Pratt had inexplicably escaped, and was lying on the ground outside the closet. A psychic was consulted, and it was her belief that there were 2 women associated with the painting. This led people to speculate that either an older portrait had been painted over, or that a model sat in for the painting. In any case, it was believed that a spirit tied to the portrait was not happy with the situation. On her trip back to Virginia, Aunt Pratt was taken to a shop in Richmond for frame repairs, and the shop owner reckoned that he heard the mysterious ringing of bells during her stay, despite the absence of bells anywhere in the building. The portrait was put back on the wall at Shirley Plantation, and all unusual activity ceased. Aunt Pratt had been appeased once again. A faceless ghost appeared in lore collector Lafcadio Hearn's 1904 collection Quaidon. Although this apparition seems to have origins in Japanese folklore, it may have eventually wound up in Hawaii, and perhaps beyond. Although it doesn't seem to be the very first, one of the most famous stories of a faceless ghost in Japan is Hearn's tale Mujina, which seemed to take place in the 1800s. It's short and in the public domain, so I'll read the full story. On the Akasaka Road in Tokyo, there's a slope called Kinokuni-zaka, which means the slope of the province of Ki. I do not know why it is called the slope of the province of Ki. On one side of this slope you see an ancient moat, deep and very wide, with high green banks rising up to some place of gardens, and on the other side of the road extend the long and lofty walls of an imperial palace. Before the era of street lamps and jinrikishas, this neighborhood was very lonesome after dark, and belated pedestrians would go miles out of their way rather than mount the Kinokuni-zaka alone after sunset, all because of a Mujina that used to walk there. The last man who saw the Mujina was an old merchant of the Kyobashi quarter, who died about 30 years ago. This is the story, as he told it. One night, at a late hour, he was hurrying up the Kinokuni-zaka when he perceived a woman crouching by the moat, all alone, and weeping bitterly. Fearing that she intended to drown herself, he stopped to offer her any assistance or consolation in his power. She appeared to be a slight and graceful person, handsomely dressed, and her hair was arranged like that of a young girl of good family. "Ojochu," he exclaimed, approaching her. "Ojochu, do not cry like that. Tell me what the trouble is, and if there be any way to help you, I shall be glad to help you." He really meant what he said, for he was a very kind man, but she continued to weep, hiding her face from him with one of her long sleeves. "Ojochu," he said again, as gently as he could. Please listen to me. This is no place for a young lady at night. Do not cry, I implore you. Only tell me how I may be of some help to you." Slowly she rose up, but turned her back to him, and continued to moan and sob behind her sleeve. He laid his hand lightly upon her shoulder, and pleaded, "Ojochu, Ojochu, Ojochu, listen to me, just for one little moment. Ojochu, Ojochu." Then that Ojochu turned around, and dropped her sleeve, and stroked her face with her hand, and the man saw that she had no eyes or nose or mouth, and he screamed and ran away. Up Kinokuni-zaka he ran, and all was black and empty before him. On and on he ran, never daring to look back, and at last he saw a lantern, so far away that it looked like the gleam of a firefly, and he made for it. It proved to be only the lantern of an itinerant soba seller who had set down his stand by the roadside, but any light in human companionship was good after that experience, and he flung himself down at the feet of the soba seller, crying out, "Ah! Ah! Ah!" "Kore, Kore!" roughly exclaimed the soba man. "Here, what is the matter with you? Anybody hurt you?" "No, nobody hurt me," panted the other. "Only... ah! Ah!" "Only scared you?" queried the peddler, unsympathetically. "Robbers?" Not robbers, gasped the terrified man. I saw a woman by the moat, and she showed me... I cannot tell you what she showed me." "Heh, was it anything like this that she showed you?" cried the soba man, stroking his own face, which therewith became like unto an egg, and simultaneously the light went out. Now let's head 4,000 miles away to the US state of Hawaii for more modern tales of faceless ghosts. A Honolulu drive-in, 1959, The story went that a woman entered the ladies' room late one night when she noticed in the mirror that there was a woman with long hair in the room with her. The figure seemed to have no face or lower body, and when the woman turned, there was no one there. The door, I'm assuming to the restroom, then closed and locked itself. A newspaper columnist for the Honolulu Advertiser claimed he heard this version from a student, who heard it from a friend of someone who was at the drive-in that night. Another version going around had the apparition combing her hair at the mirror when she turned toward the woman and revealed her lack of a face. Some said the woman fainted and had to be taken to a hospital. Crowds of people flocked to the drive-in in the following weeks, hoping to catch a glimpse of this faceless apparition for themselves. When the newspaper columnist who publicized the rumor got in touch with the drive-in's manager, the man told him he felt the story was a fabrication. He claimed a woman had recently approached him with the story before it came out, saying her friend had seen a faceless woman in the restroom. He told her to bring the friend to give him more details, but she never did. The manager also claimed the theater had a regular prankster who would slip papers under and lock restroom doors. Just days before the drive-in rumor, there were apparently rumors of a faceless woman at a local middle school. It's unknown whether or not the rumors were connected. Much later, during a radio broadcast in the early 80s by Hawaiian ghost lore author Glen, listeners called in claiming they had seen the ghost firsthand. One woman claimed that just a couple years prior she had seen a faceless woman with red hair in the same drive-in restroom. Glen would go on to collect several tales of faceless ghosts in Hawaii that allegedly occurred in the 80s and 90s. The question of whether these tales were cases of the evolution of a folktale or actual anomalous experiences remains. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this first batch of ghost stories. There are countless more where these came from. Perhaps you are alone at night listening to this right now, and are just on the verge of having an experience of your own. So good night and pleasant nightmares.